Norman Green started his career at the EMI Research Laboratories, working on military projects, including television cameras for the Black Knight rocket program. It was here that he worked under Dr. Eric White, one of Isaac Schoenberg's original design team that invented electronic television. Norman worked in a number of high-profile companies on projects involved in the development of television, including the ABC, Thames Television, the EBU, and ITV. He was made a Fellow of the Royal Television Society for his outstanding contribution to the development of television, and has received numerous other awards for his work. In this talk, Norman uses material from the BBC and other archives, going back to when television first started to leave the confines of the studio environment. It includes film from the Berlin Games in 1936, and what is believed to be the only surviving television footage from the London 1948 Games. Norman covers the history leading up to the television coverage of the 1948 Olympics and a little bit beyond, a fascinating piece of early broadcasting history. Here's Norman Green.
Now, I'm going to talk about televising the London Olympics in 1948. The first book I ever bought on television was at the Ideal Home exhibition in 1949. And in that book, it says, London 1948, the first Olympic Games to be televised. But that's not exactly true. The first Olympic Games to be televised was in Berlin between the 1st and 16th of August 1936. They televised it with a system of 180 TV lines at 25 pictures a second. The German Post Office was in charge of the tests, and they used basically three methods of originating pictures: the intermediate film process, 3 iconoscope cameras, and a Farnsworth image dissector camera. Now, you can find out about these, what they actually are, in any good textbook. Now, for receiving the signals of televising the games, Goebbels said none to be sold to the public at all. The German elite had cable-fed receivers, and there were 25 public viewing theatres or parlours, plus receivers in the Olympic Village. The public viewing theatres were spread around Berlin.
The chosen few who had television sets were party bigwigs, post office technicians, and a handful of journalists. Initially, the public could only see the programs in a few television parlours in Berlin.
The picture on the screen was naturally smaller than today, about 20 by 25 centimeters approximately. 20 people sat in a darkened room, and then every once in a while someone went up to one of the 2 sets standing there. It was usually the man from the post office who turned the knobs and regulated the contrast. Sometimes the picture disappeared completely, and the real thrill came when the picture reappeared after they fiddled with the knobs.
Breakthrough came with the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936. During the 2 weeks of the Games, 160,000 people visited television parlours that had been set up all over Berlin. 3 giant brand new electronic cameras were used to guarantee good quality broadcasts.
Im Mittelpunkt des Reichssportfeldes liegt das Olympiastadion, das der Schauplatz von vielen heißen Kämpfen sein wird. 100.000 finden im Stadion Platz, und den vielen anderen, die keinen Einlass mehr fanden, bietet der Fernsehdienst Gelegenheit, mit Auge und Ohr an dem großartigen sportlichen Schauspiele teilzunehmen.
The German Post Office had also invented a system to enable it to show events as they happened, almost. The exposed film was channeled straight from the camera through the roof of a recording truck, where it was immediately developed and broadcast to the television parlours via a transmitter. It wasn't live, but it was close. Though ingenious, the picture quality and even the camera work often disappointed. A fragment of nearly live coverage of an Olympic soccer match.
Es steht 2:0 für Österreich. Etwa 10 Minuten nach Beginn der zweiten Halbzeit schoss Österreichs Halbrechter. Unhaltbar ein.
While the reporter and cameraman struggled with the complexities of live-action television, others had an easier assignment. A TV report from the Olympic Village.
Der aktuelle Bilddienst des Fernsehsenders Paul Nipkow lädt Sie heute ein zu einem Streifzug durch das Olympische Dorf. Und auch Sie, meine Damen, können heute mit von der Partie sein, sonst gab es das nicht. Hier sehen Sie es, Frauen hinter Gittern. Und nun durch das Tor, vorbei am Pförtner. Und schon hier ein paar Aktive, ein Türke, ein Bulgare und der argentinische Boxer Lovell. Und nun sind wir drin. Auf dem viel gelästerten Märkischen Sand ist ein kleines Paradies entstanden. Die deutsche Wehrmacht hat es erbaut. Und hier ein Teil der amerikanischen Mannschaft vor dem Hause Dessau. Und hier ein amerikanisches Superschwergewicht. Ein ungleiches Paar aus USA, ein Basketballspieler und der Captain der Gewichtheber. Wundervoll passen sich die Häuser der Landschaft an und sie sind auch herrlich, massiv und fest gebaut. Es muss ein wundervolles Wohnen sein.
The reporter for the New York Times went to one of the viewing theatres and he witnessed the 4 times 100 meters relay final, and he said it was evident that the boys were running fast, but Jesse Owens looked awful and Frank Wyckoff's legs wobbled. The stadium spectators in the background sort of melted together and the whole scene shook like jelly. The eye strain was considerable and many didn't stay for the remainder of the afternoon's events. Back in Britain, in that August, there was the radio exhibition at Radio Olympia, and the BBC were on alternate days transmitting shows from Alexandra Palace down to Radio Olympia. And on one day they used the Baird system, on another one they used the EMI system. This is an EMI camera channel of 1936. And here's the rear of it, and you can see how neatly it was made. There's nothing of a lash up there. The camera used what was called a standard Emertron camera, which was basically an iconoscope camera. Here's the tube with the mosaic and the head amplifier. And this is basically how it worked. You focus the image on a mosaic, which was effectively lots of silver oxide droplets, which acted like capacitors, and they charged up in proportion to the light. And when you scan with an electron beam, you discharge them, and the signal produced was amplified and transmitted. And that's the basis of all pickup tubes. And this, in 1936, is the type of picture that you got out of a standard Emertron camera channel. And when they were making the programs for Radio Olympia, they found that if they took the cameras outside, because they were quite light and portable, they could show pictures of the scenes in Alexandra Park and of London. And once the service started, the experiment started, in 1937, they built a garden in Alexandra Palace and they did a sort of outside broadcast. In Alexandra Park is a racetrack, and Jasmine Bligh went down there to do a program from the racetrack. And they brought up animals from the London Zoo. You can see here an elephant, and over here my favorite animal, the penguins. And they did Friends from the Zoo. They did tea time, note the pun, teaching people how to play golf. They taught people how to go camping. Model yachting. Note the gentleman always carrying the sort of meat-safe microphone. And at Easter in 1937, they took the cameras outside for the fair that was at Alexandra Palace, and they televised things. That's the famous Leslie Mitchell. And they did, in June 37, a young farmers program. The interesting thing is that they're all pensionable age except the young boy here. But the first big outside broadcast, real outside broadcast, was the coronation of King George VI. EMI were asked by the BBC in February to produce an OB unit by May from scratch, and they decided not to redesign anything, but just make another set of equipment that they installed at Alexandra Palace and put it into these trucks. They had these trucks built just down the road at Southall at AEC, where they built London's buses and Green Line coaches. And here's a view of the production van, which has sides which lift up and drop down for access to the equipment. And here's a view inside the van. You can see the 3 cameras are stowed there. Here's the transmission monitor, the preview monitor, the vision mixer, the camera control equipment, and the sound control equipment. And they had a very novel way of carrying the camera cables. And here's the view of the van under operational conditions. They also built a transmitter van, a 1 kilowatt transmitter van at 64 megahertz, and for a modulator, they effectively used a downsized version of the modulator that had been designed for the Alexandra Palace transmitter. And of course, you have to have power, and there's an AEC diesel engine there driving a generator in another van. Now, for the coronation, the site chosen was at Hyde Park Corner at Apsley Gate, where they would see the procession coming up Park Lane and then going through the gate and then going down towards Buckingham Palace. The BBC were not too happy about the reliability of transmitting the pictures over air to Alexandra Palace, so EMI designed a balanced pair cable, and this is its frequency response, as you see, from Whitehall to Alexandra Palace. And the cable was made by Siemens, and here it is leaving the production van at Apsley Gate and going down into the cable duct, and one of the equalizers that we used. And here is the production van on a grassy knoll at Hyde Park Corner, and behind it is the transmission van with its aerial beaming the pictures back to Alexandra Palace. The equipment was only delivered 2 days before the coronation, so they had quite a busy time getting it ready. And they built some rostrum either side of the gate, and they had a camera on each one looking down Park Lane, the other one towards Buckingham Palace. Here's where the commentator, Freddie Griswold, would stand to give his commentary. And here is the classic photograph of members of the Board of Governors of the BBC and of the Television Advisory Committee inspecting one of the camera positions the day before the coronation. The most important person here is, in actual fact, this gentleman here. His name is Isaac Schoenberg. He was Director of Research at EMI. He was a refugee from Russia. He was in Kiev first and then St. Petersburg, but unfortunately Jews were persecuted in Russia, both under the Tsars and under the communists. And so in 1914, he came to Britain. He persuaded the management of EMI, Electrical and Musical Industries, to spend £100,000 a year from 1933 on television research. And if you do the sums, that is approximately a figure between 16 and 25 million pounds at today's prices. When you do archive research, there's always a eureka moment when you find something that you've never seen before. This is a photograph taken at the back of the production vehicle. It shows Sir Stephen Tallents, who was head of public relations for the Board of Governors of the BBC, and Isaac Schoenberg, with his classic pince-nez, which he wore all his life on his nose, and his classic cigarette holder and cigarette. To my knowledge, this has never been published before. It is quite unique. I asked in the archives if I could see the photographs of the coronation, and a young man went down into the vaults at the television centre and came back with these beautiful leather-bound, green leather-bound photographic albums. And as I went through them, this was my eureka moment.
Meanwhile, the coaxial cable is being tested by the Post Office engineers. This coaxial cable is destined to carry television from the heart of London up to the transmitter. The cable is hauled through ducts at Alexandra Palace and greased to make it slide more easily down the manholes and through the pipes which carry it. Length by length, it is pulled through.
We've got two of our cameras high up on the gate itself, one looking up the East Carriage Drive. This will catch the procession as it comes into view, and the other that will take the tail of the procession after it's passed by us. The third one on the pavement is within some 3 or more feet of the royal coach as it comes by. And this is the one that will have the honor of televising their majesties for the first time. Now this will give you some idea of what we look like from the ground. Last preparations, a last look round the camera on the pavement to see that everything's all right. And now, I'm sorry to say that conditions are against us. It started to rain, and the light is none too good, but we'll stick to it and hope for the best. It's very bad luck, as had it been an hour ago, everything would have been perfect. Jefferson Greys drawing on that almost unbelievable stagecoach with their majesties, the King and Queen.
Now, the BBC, after this coronation broadcast, decided to put in the cable all around the West End of London. So it went from Broadcasting House, Oxford Street, Park Lane, up Piccadilly, Shaftesbury Avenue, through Theatreland, down to Westminster Abbey, Houses of Parliament, and also down Pall Mall to the Buckingham Palace, but more importantly, down to Victoria Station, where visiting dignitaries from around the world came. The first televising of the Wimbledon Championships came in '37, and here you see two cameras in front of the Royal Box. And here you see a camera that's been mounted on one of the uprights of the stands at Wimbledon, doing an oblique shot of the centre court, unmanned. And then the pictures from the production vehicle went across on these poles across the car park. Can you imagine that being allowed by public health and safety today? And it came to the transmitter van, and then the signals went to the area to be transmitted back to Alexandra Palace. And the BBC went out and did various outside broadcasts. Here they are at Arsenal Football Stadium doing a programme. But the BBC found that the standard Emitron camera wasn't really sensitive enough when there were low light levels or in certain halls, etc. So EMI had developed in 1934 the image iconoscope, the Super Emitron, and it's this image section that then affected all the subsequent developments of camera pickup tubes. This tube is about 10 to 15 times more sensitive than a standard Emitron. And there it is with the image section on the front, in the camera. You can always tell a Super Emitron camera when you look at a photograph. On the left-hand side, looking at the lenses, there's a bump on the left-hand side. It's commonly said that the first use of it was at Remembrance Sunday in 1937, but it wasn't. In actual fact, it was the day before at the Lord Mayor's show. Here you can see the bulge on the thing, 2 cameras on the top, and the commentator out in the elements doing his stuff. The Remembrance Day service was televised by a Super Emitron and 2 standard Emitrons on November 1937. The significant thing about this program, which is one of the things you find at Caversham, is the fact that this program was broadcast with no commentary at all. It was only broadcast effectively with music and effects, the bands and everything, the marching, but no commentary at all. And here's another view of the camera positions. And here's a shot off the screen. This is from a magazine, so of course it's got all the problems of that, but this is a shot from a Super Emitron of the Cenotaph. And they went out and they did the finish of the boat race, boxing at Earl's Court. And in May 1938, they took delivery, the BBC, of another OB unit equipped with 3 Super Emitron sensitive cameras. And the other unique thing about this outside broadcast unit was the transmitter van. It still had a 1 kilowatt transmitter on a 64 megs, but the modulator was based on the distributed amplifier that Percival at EMI had developed. What they did, the distributed amplifier modulator, was lots of low power stages in parallel to drive the transmitter. And here it is, the Super Emitron camera opposite the finish line for the Derby. Again, what would the public health and safety say about that? But there was a problem in 1938 in doing outside broadcasts. The BBC had asked EMIs to convert the Baird studio, Studio B, into an operational studio, and this is it being converted. Here is the control room looking out with the sound mixer here. And here's the director's position with his microphone, his preview and transmission monitors, and the faders for the vision. But the problem was that they used to do outside broadcasts mainly in the afternoon. And you had to have effectively topping and tailing of the outside broadcast. So you needed an announcer in the studio to introduce the program and then to close it. And how do you do that when you've only got a vision mixer that's got effectively 6 inputs, 4 cameras and 2 telecines? So what they had to do, they had to unplug either a telecine or a camera from the vision mixer, plug the OB unit picture in there to get it to the transmitter and to do the continuity. And this was a major problem because it took up time that they wanted to rehearse the programs to do in the evening. So the BBC asked EMI to produce a master control room, and here's the master control room. You've got 2 pulse generators, sequential pulse generators here, main and standby. This is the audio input equipment, the audio mixer, the communications, which in Alexandra Palace was all telephones, the preview and the transmission monitor, and the vision mixer. And here you see it under operational conditions. And then they were off. Once they could go through the master control, the number of outside broadcasts increased enormously. Here they are at the London Zoo. And here they are at Roehampton Club doing archery. There's a Super Emitron up there and a standard one there. Then they had obviously an announcer taking part in it. And they needed to get the signals back to Alexandra Palace. And if they'd have put the normal aerial up, it would have been obstructed by buildings. So they bought a Merryweather fire escape and put the aerial on top of the Merryweather fire escape. They televised Trooping the Colour. They went back to Wimbledon for the Lawn Tennis Championships, and you can now see They're using the fire escape. They went to Crystal Palace to televise motor racing. They went down on the farm to show viewers what it was like working on a farm. Now, this is a very interesting sound boom. I don't really know how you work that, whether you bend up and down like this and move around with it, because I think this pole goes onto some sort of breastplate on the guy. Anyway, they did that. But then the most significant outside broadcast was the 30th of September 1938 at Heston Airport. They took the whole fleet of OB units, and here you see a Super Emitron camera covering Chamberlain when he's come back from Munich with his little piece of paper saying, "Peace in our time." Round about the late 70s and early 80s, we all got excited about electronic news gathering. But this, in my opinion, is the first example in the world of electronic news gathering. They went off to England, Scotland, at Wembley. They went to a film premiere at St Martin's Lane. This is a thin Charles Lawton and Elsa Lanchester. And they went to theatres. In those days, before the war and just after the war, the management of West End theatres were very kind to the BBC, and they used to let them go to the theatres and televise their productions. This one is the first one that was ever done, When We Are Married, St Martin's Theatre in November 38. They did the boat race, and this time with the 2 OB trucks, they could cover the start and the finish of the boat race. They went to Hanworth to see the Civil Guard aircraft. They went to Chelsea Flower Show. They went down on the farm again, and this time the sound man's doing a rather funny thing there. And they went to Coombe Hill Golf Club to televise a golf match and also to get some instruction on golf. And they went to the Round Pond in Kensington Gardens for model boats. This is where I used to take my model boat and sail. I used to get on the number 12 bus from Uxbridge Road, Shepherd's Bush, and go up to Bayswater and walk through the park and sail my boat on the Round Pond. And here is an outside broadcast of a Punch and Judy show. And you might be interested that the person doing the Punch and Judy is Jan Bussell, who was the person who made Muffin the Mule. And they went to Clitheroe Lock at Brentford. And here A.P. Herbert, the author, who wrote the book The Water Gypsies, did a programme about life on canals. And here, August Bank Holiday 1939, they went to Finchley Road Children's Pool to televise swimming. And I'd just like to point out the camera here, with the camera cable coming out over people's shoulders to the bank. Now, can you imagine the public health and safety allowing that today? But they must have all been getting quite a nice tingle, I think. All these guys in the water had a tingling effect. This is a piece of film that was filmed by Pathé. It's at the zoo, and it's got an interesting shot. It's the only moving picture you can find. There's the transmitter truck, and there's its aerial. That is the only moving sort of picture ever of that, and it does go on.
The other aspect of television, which brings home its exciting actuality and immediacy, is the outside broadcast. This is only a film, but our actual broadcasts are live. We take you to the event, and nobody in the world knows who will win or what will happen. You see it for yourself, and thus share in the excitement of those who are actually present.
Like the studio camera, the outside broadcast camera is connected directly to its own control room, but in this case a mobile one, which is the counterpart of the studio control room at Alexandra Palace.
Now, hold it, Mitch. On new camera 1.
A specialist commentator, who in this case would be a rowing man, adds to your and our enjoyment with an exposed description of the event.
Good evening, Prep, it's Robert Hall. Oxford 1, Oxford 1, John Alabama Shattered. Good there it is. Oxford is 1 meter and better this back. 3 lengths and a half. The students coming ashore now, so let's go over to the boathouses to see the crews coming in.
Welcome to the boathouse. Join a crowd which is displaying very mixed feelings, and those disappointed faces leave no doubt that their owners were supporting Cambridge.
The link with the main transmitter can be either by means of a special high-frequency cable, which can be tapped almost anywhere in the west end of London, or when the outside broadcast unit is not on the cable route, by means of a mobile transmitter, the signals of which are fed to a transmitting aerial mounted on an extendable fire escape. The wavelength used is shorter than that of the main transmitter at Alexandra Palace, so the outside broadcast signal can be picked up either at the palace itself or at a convenient receiving station on the cable route, whence it is relayed by the cable to the palace. Here it is re-radiated from the main areas.
After the war, the BBC wanted to televise the Victory Parade. One of the outside broadcast units was taken to EMI at Hayes, to Lake Farm, where they used to test all their radar aerials and then television aerials. And here you see one of the units sort of getting working again. And those of you who are old enough to know, this gentleman here is actually Phil Parker, who was Director of Engineering of RTE and then of Yorkshire Television. And here they are televising the Victory Parade, Attlee and Churchill over here. And here's a nice shot of the transmitting aerial and the planes. And off they went again, televising lots of OBs. Bertram Mills Circus, beekeeping in Alexandra Palace Garden, archery again, they were quite fond of archery. And here was their run-up to the Olympic Games. Hyde Park, 17th of April 1948, Super Ematrons covering gymnastics, and over at the back there you can just see a camera on a dolly, and here's the view from that camera of them training. Now during the war, EMIS did some work on an orthicon camera tube for military purposes, but the military, as usual, after a while decided not to do anything about it. And EMI and all British broadcast equipment manufacturers were banned effectively from doing any television work. They had to do military work. But this is the cathode potential stabilization Emitron camera tube. See, the cathode potential stabilization was invented by Blumlein and McGee around about 1935. Here's one of the tubes. And EMIS built 2 prototype cameras. Here they are at the Adelphi Theatre doing low light level tests. The BBC wanted more sensitive cameras, and this was an attempt at producing them. This is McGee, who did the tube work. And at the royal wedding on the 20th of November 1947 of the present Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, these 2 prototype cameras were put up outside Westminster Abbey. As you can see, one's blown up already. Here's a Super Emitron, and there's a CPS Emitron. In actual fact, I was at a reunion lunch the other day, a couple of weeks ago, with these 3 guys, and they were telling me stories about this. They slept in the van all night. They had to be there so early. Now, this is silent. This is news film. This is the BBC newsreel for the royal wedding in the evening. Now, this is a tele-recording, and you have to guess which is the Super Emitron picture and which is the CPS picture. This is a suppressed field recording, so the resolution is only 202.5 lines, but I found out from Caversham the lines have been spot wobbled. And this was not actually done by the BBC, it was done by Cinema Television for them down at Sydenham. And this is the procession coming up to Westminster Abbey. And this in the coach here is Princess Elizabeth. You can just about see her. Now, this is where you have to guess whether this is the CPS or the Super Emitron. I think, from research I've done, that one you've just seen is the CPS, and this is the Super Emitron. The carriages come up, and you can see the bridesmaids and various people getting out of their carriages. Up here, I think you'll see a bridesmaid. Oh, here's one coming out, yes. One of the bridesmaids. Another one. And there you've got super 35mm black and white film. Isn't it lovely? That was done in November, the 20th. A couple of weeks later, there was a special performance at Broadcasting House in the Radio Theatre of Itmar. Now, I better explain what Itmar is. It means It's That Man Again, and it was a comedy show starring Tommy Handley, and it ran throughout the war, and it was a sort of morale booster for the British public. It was an extremely popular comedy show, and it had a characteristic expression. The cleaning lady used to come round and say, can I do your nails, sir? And it was a catchphrase in the country.
And now Derek Guyler. We're all very much intrigued with that book the King is holding. We don't quite know what it's all about. I think it is a script of tonight's performance, a presentation copy. And here's Jack Train. I wonder what the Queen will say to Jack. Queen's wearing most lovely sort of cream-coloured dress tonight. It looks like satin from here, with a beautiful white fur stole around her neck, around her shoulders. It's not very easy to see because, of course, she's got her back to me. But if she turns round, we shall be able to see more detail. Here's Ray Jenkins. That's the leader, the conductor of the Variety Orchestra being presented. Princess Margaret on the left, way out of our picture, is being very interested in talking to Derek Guyler. She's explaining something to him because I can see her pointing. There again, I would like to describe Princess Margaret's dress, but I can only see the back of it. It looks perfectly charming from here. But being a mere man, I have very little idea of how to describe a dress like that, except to say that she looks particularly nice in it. Here's John Snagg being introduced to Her Majesty the Queen, being presented. He was the announcer of tonight's performance on the stage. There was no doubt about the King's genuine enjoyment. He really did just roar with laughter once or twice. There's Lady Reading standing on the Queen's right now. She's talking to Michael Standing. Now the Queen is turning around towards us more now, and we can see perhaps more details of her dress. It is a lovely dress. The beautiful rope of pearls she's got round her neck. And now I think the royal party is beginning to move out of the hall. The Queen is bowing to the orchestra. And she and Princess Margaret are going out for the King, followed by Lady...
Now, in February of 1948, EMI received an order from the BBC to produce a new outside broadcast around the CPS Emertron. At the same time, Pi received an order to build a camera outside broadcast unit around a Photicon. Now, a Photicon was a miniature super Emertron tube, and in actual fact, Pi were making this unit, but instead of delivering it in time for the games in July, they delivered it in April 1949, which was a bit late. The camera that was produced was the first one outside of America to have a turret of lenses, an electronic viewfinder, and a built-in microphone for talkback to the director. Up until that time, the director could talk to the cameraman, but not reverse. The BBC designed an outside broadcast vehicle that they wanted all their different equipment, from different manufacturers installed in. They did have a problem. They didn't do the sight lines properly, according to Caversham. This is the inside of the EMI van, the 3 camera control units, the preview monitor, and the transmission radio check monitor. Here you see the main and the standby pulse generators and the voltage control unit for the equipment. And here they are outside the Wembley Empire Pool, testing the cameras. It's got a rather novel test chart holder. It was very interesting. In the Radio Times, a fortnight before the Olympic Games, it said technicians of Messrs EMI worked day and night to ensure the equipment was ready. Well, in actual fact, that is not journalistic license. They did actually, for the 6 months between February and July, at the back of EMI is an auditorium, a cinema, and that is where Blumlein did his stereo sound experiments in 1933-34. And during the war, they put in a sub-mezzanine floor of concrete and built dormitories underneath. And the people working in that building, either if they lived near, they went home, but if they lived a long way away, they actually slept in the dormitories. And they went to bed at about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, and they were up again at 6, 6:30, working again. And they did that for 13 days on the trot during the war, and then they were allowed to go home Saturday night, and they had to be back at work on Sunday night. And they did exactly the same method of working to get this OB truck made. And it does say experience gain from something like 500 outside broadcasts since 1937 are built into the equipment. If you work that out, as I have done, 1 unit, then 2 unit, it is in actual fact they were doing up to 3 or 4 outside broadcasts a week, which is not bad with 2 units. Now we come to the Olympics itself in 48. They've got the equipment. The venues of the Olympics were, as you can see, the Empire Stadium, Athletics, Empire Pool, Henley, Herne Hill, Windsor Great Park, Empress Hall, Haringey Arena for basketball, Wembley for fencing, Aldershot Military for the equestrian events, Bisley for shooting, Torbay for yachting. And for the hockey, they used the Joe Lyons Sports Club at Greenford and the Guinness Sports Club at Park Royal. And for the football, they used these football grounds of these football clubs. Broadcasters, there were 134 visiting broadcasters from 60 radio organisations, 28 countries. The BBC had 146 reporters supplying reports to its services in 41 languages. You must remember that in 1948 we had an empire. And to cater with all this, the BBC built really the first broadcasting centre for radio and television. And here's the entrance hall, the reception area. And in that, they had 35,000 square feet of floor space. It was capable of 36 simultaneous broadcasts, 16 studios, 20 disc recording channels, 2 television control rooms, 350 engineers, 200 reporters, and 200 support staff. And here is the floor plan. You can see the central control room where all the radio signals would go through, the recording rooms and the studios, and of course the cafe. And over here, the vision central control room and the production control rooms. Before they actually did the building inside, you can see it's ongoing, but they built 36 commentary boxes which would go into the Empire Stadium for the commentators there. And here they are installing the central control room and commissioning it. And here it is under operational conditions. This is where the 36 simultaneous broadcasts were routed. Here's one of the disc recording channels, 2 machines. Note this sound insulation. And here are the line identification reproducers. This was an idea from Finland. Finland were going to have the 1940 Olympic Games in Helsinki, but of course the war came along. But they thought up an idea of how to identify the long-distance audio circuits. They had to train commentators for the Olympics that had come from not only extra BBC ones, but people from around the world. Everybody would use a lip microphone. The lip microphone had been developed by the Beeb in 1938, and this is a photograph of the prototype lip microphone. It didn't change much over the years, did it? And here is the commentary position in the Empire Pool. There's a guy down here with his lip microphone, but I put this in to show you the parabolic microphone for picking up sound effects. And all the correspondence that came from all around the world, the BBC seconded from the BBC World Service a person who spoke in the language of the people from around the world to assist them in doing their broadcasts. And they provided telephone facilities so that they could talk to their own broadcasting organisations. And I thought you'd like to see this under operational conditions. And it's rather interesting how this guy's outside, but this lady, I think she's taking it off the wall. The statistics, there were 364 broadcasts a day, 114 were live, 250 were recorded. Broadcasts last between 15 minutes and 4 hours, and over 6,000 discs were cut. Now, what about television? Well, there were going to be 2 television outside broadcast units, one underneath the seating of the Empire Stadium, another one in the Empire Pool, this was the new EMI truck outside. And in the Radio Times of the week before the Olympic Games, it said this: when the Olympics ends on August the 14th, they will broadcast more than 50 hours of programs, an average of 3.5 a day. But this does not mean there will be no studio programs, for the service will continue to provide 1.5 hours of program every day. From correspondence received, it is clear that a large percentage of viewers still try to see all the programs televised. It is hoped that this habit will not persist during the periods of the Games, or viewers will easily be recognised in the streets of London by their pallid appearance. Also in the Radio Times, and I won't go into in detail, but the BBC recruited commentators for the television service. One of the interesting things they did was to show the people a film and then ask them to commentate on it. And it really does apply, I think, particularly now. It said, in the tests that have been conducted, the object of the premiere has been to plumb the depths of the aspirant's knowledge. A silent film has been used to test his voice, quickness of reaction, sense of drama, and general aptitude for television commentary. Now, it's interesting that it was a pity that the commentators for the river pageant didn't undergo the same tests. And this is the team of commentators. For the old fogies like me in the room, you'll recognise some of the names. Peter Wilson, who used to do boxing, etc., Richard Dimbleby, Michael Henderson, Peter Dimmock, and Bill Allenby. These others were obviously Jimmy Jewell, no relation to the comedian, and these obviously fell by the wayside after the Olympics because they weren't very good at it. Again here, Jack Crump, who was an athletics commentator. Ian Orr Ewing was actually head of outside broadcasts at the time. He went on to be a very famous MP. But you will see that the rest of these four, dropped by the wayside as well. And on the 29th of July, the King went to open the Olympic Games. And this is what the Radio Times said. And here's a view of a Super Emertron covering the opening ceremony here. And here you see, at the end of the opening ceremony, they released 3,000 homing pigeons from the stadium. Here's Richard Dimbleby with Michael Henderson doing the commentary on the opening. And you can see the rows of athletes lined up through the commentary box window. And they had, for the opening day, they had another camera on the balcony outside of Wembley Stadium, looking down the Olympic Way to, first of all, see the King and Queen come down to go into the stadium, and then to see the torch come down as well. And this is photographs taken when they were firing at the opening a salute of guns. Here is the commentary box in the stadium, and you can see this is the mid-shot camera, and this is the telephoto lens camera, both Super Emertrons. And here's a close-up of those two cameras. Here, it was a very novel commentary box because it had windows in the sides, and one of the cameras could turn round, and then within the box, somebody could be interviewed. This is Maureen Gardner, the 100 metres and 200 metres women racer. But it's interesting that they were obviously having problems with the contrast range of the background and the person, because in another shot later on, you can see that they've erected a curtain to give a nice contrast range between the interviewee and the background. And here's the 10,000 metre walk being covered, heat of the men's 1500, the equestrian event, which was on the final day of the Olympics, football. And underneath the seating of the stadium, where the OB truck was parked, they had the third camera of the unit with effectively a caption stand, and they were able to put up captions and also to put the photo finishes up when there were close run things. Now, the pictures from the van here went across into the radio centre, the Palace of Arts, and into one of these two control rooms. They never used this one. It was a standby in case the EMI unit didn't arrive and they had to use the other old EMI unit, so it wasn't used. And here is that control room. They had a sound mixer in it. The idea was to demand the OB truck as much as possible, so they had a sound mixer there. They had the transmission and preview monitors from the cameras of the truck and a radio check receiver, and then the director here of the coverage in the stadium would then talk by telephone to a guy who was sitting on a stool here operating the vision mixer and cutting from preview to transmission. Alongside the pool was parked the EMI unit.
Viewers who were able to look in on Thursday will have seen the opening events of the Olympic Games. For the evening transmission, the BBC brought into use for the first time its latest EMI outside broadcast equipment. The new vehicle arrived a few days ago at Wembley, and the head of television outside broadcast is here to tell you about it.
Well, it's no secret that outside broadcasting has in the past been carried out under great difficulty and with very cumbersome equipment. And this compact trailer contains the fruits of many years of planning. This is one of the new CPS Emitron cameras being handled for the first time. It's extremely sensitive and can produce good pictures in light far too dim for cine cameras. On the roof is an ordinary television aerial used for picking up the picture as rebroadcast from Alexandra Palace. This enables the producer to make a smooth changeover from the studio to the OB program. Doors in the side lead into the trailer, which is itself a mobile control room. The equipment can actually be taken out of the trailer if required for use elsewhere. Inside the vehicle, everybody sits in comfort instead of standing as we had to in the old vans. Each of the three cameras has its own preview tube, so that the producer can instantaneously select for transmission the best of the three pictures available. Here at the Empire Pool are the cameras themselves set up ready to watch first the aquatic events and later the boxing. The cameras are extremely complicated and use miniature valves developed for radar and other secret purposes during the war. The viewfinder is itself a small television tube instead of the optical finder that's used in the older cameras, and all the components are easily accessible for maintenance purposes. Another useful feature is the revolving lens turret, operated from behind, and by which any of these three lenses can be brought instantly into position. The largest of these is the 17-inch telephoto to give you close-ups of distant events. And the whole turret can be removed in a matter of seconds and replaced with another. This one carries three wide-angle lenses to give wider fields of view.
So, beginning with the Olympic Games of 1948, television outside broadcasts enter on a new era of comfort for their crews, and we hope even better pictures for you.
Here's the camera position in the Empire Pool. And here they are covering the men's 1500 freestyle final. You may like to wonder what these numbers are that everybody's hanging over the thing. Apparently, on a long distance race, you lose track of the number of laps you've done effectively. So they hold these out to tell you how far you've got to go. Here's the water polo being covered by the cameras over there. And in the second week, after the swimming, they installed a rostrum actually in the water of the pool and then put a boxing ring on top of it and covered the boxing events. And here you see a camera position for the boxing, and here's the commentator with his lip microphone and monitor. And the pictures from the EMI van and the one underneath the stadium went to the master control room here. And here it is. It's got some turntables, etc. And over here is the sound mixer. Again, it's using standard Pi console television receivers as monitors. What you have to realize is there had been no television development throughout the war, and so there was just not the equipment available. And so they used standard domestic sets. Here is the transmission picture, and this under here is the vision switcher, and that's the sound mixer. And here are the cables that are going to take the vision and sound signals off to Broadcasting House. Here you can see there was a special vision cable put into Alexandra Palace. The cable route went from Wembley to Broadcasting House via all these lovely named telephone exchanges, a distance of 10 miles, and the attenuation was 8 dB per mile at 3 megahertz and 1 dB per mile at DC. And the signals arrived at Broadcasting House in the lines room. And this lines room is exactly the same equipment that was there for the 1937 coronation. And you can see the same sort of monitors, and the signals from here, once they were checked, went up to Alexandra Palace. But also, because the BBC were worried about a breakdown, they had installed one of the mobile VHS transmitters to get the pictures back directly to Alexandra Palace. Now, what was interesting here, that I found in the written archives a note from Ian Orr Ewing to the chief engineer of television saying something had got to be done about the quality of the engineers, because when the cable broke down, he noticed that the picture quality, when it went to the VHF link, went down. And he said, we never used to have this trouble before the war. It's obvious that we haven't got the right trained engineers operating the transmitters. So he was quite narked about that. Statistics. From 2:45 on July the 29th until 5 p.m. on August the 14th, they did 68 hours, 29 minutes. So an average of 5 hours per day, not the 3.5 that they hoped to do. They were actually televising until 8:30 at night from the stadium. A very significant day was August the 12th in the Olympics. And that is because on August the 12th, for the first time ever, 3 mobile units were in operation. 2 at Wembley, 1 at White City, a record of 8 hours continuous television. White City Athletics, Olympic boxing from the Empire Pool, hockey from the stadium, an Olympic newsreel, and a full-length play, A.A. Milne's Dover Road.
On Saturday, July the 31st, 1948, under a blazing summer sky, in the presence of their Majesties the King and Queen, and in a spirit of good fellowship that stirred every one of the 80,000 spectators, the international games of the 14th modern Olympiad began at Wembley. And for a crowded and exciting fortnight, thanks to broadcasting, the battles of the giants were followed throughout the world. Thus, once again, the games were brought in sound into the homes of the people. But this time, for those possessing television receivers, with pictures too.
As well, the contingent of Great Britain.
But for all the thousands who, in actuality or on the television screen, saw the events, millions heard.
Empty still, because the Olympic flame is still on its way, and it'll be some minutes.
In every village and city, not only of Great Britain but of the world, national heroes could be acclaimed in the very instant of their triumph.
Emrys James the fencer, and behind the officials first marching in line.
Here in the old Palace of Arts was where it all began. where, in addition to its own team of commentators for its home and overseas programs, the BBC provided facilities for over 120 broadcasters from foreign countries. In the reception hall, they were welcomed and made to feel at home. In the radio correspondence room, they found their liaison officers, all expert linguists who had been seconded from the BBC's overseas service. This was their headquarters, where all their routine work was done, their plans made, and a way cleared for their commentaries and stories to go out. In this room, too, they were able to receive instructions and criticisms from their own countries through the overseas telephone service of the GPO. Another large room was laid out as an information centre, where news of the latest happenings at any of the 28 venues of the Games was always available. On the blackboard were written the main events of the day at Haringey, Earl's Court, Herne Hill, Henley, Aldershot and so on. And all round the walls notices were posted showing what had gone before. By telephone, teleprinter and messenger, information was being received and analysed here all through the day. The object of all this activity, of course, was to get the stories on the air, whether for home or overseas.
Il le faut pour la partie de basket de cet après-midi.
À quelle heure c'est? À 2h.
À 2h, oui, à 2h.
Et c'est pour l'émission de ce soir?
De 9h30.
De 9h30 dans le studio 5, oui. C'est bien ça.
C'est bien comme ça. Voilà, merci beaucoup.
The service organizer takes the request to a colleague in the next room.
May I have a recording for 1400-1420 basketball?
Yes, what Haringey position?
Haringey, line 4.
Haringey 4, position 10.
Position 10, very good.
Recording 5.
And can you give me the disc number now?
Yes. This number will be 3398.
3398.
As the time for an event approached, the commentators would take their places in the broadcaster's box overlooking the pool or the arena.
Including Harold Abram.
40 yards on their marks, they're off. Off to a good start. With Duncan White of Ceylon making the running. There's Cochrane of the United States, the favourite, strongly placed in the third leg. And there he goes, he's past White, and it's Cochrane of the United States who wins and breaks another Olympic record.
The long jump. Here comes Aaron Chick and Poland. Now they're measuring up.
British listeners at home heard most of these commentaries direct as they were spoken. So did many foreigners whose time was roughly the same as ours. But frequently the commentary had to be recorded on disc to be played back at a time convenient to listeners on the other side of the world.
And Whitfield's moving out now. He's still running third. Listen to that crowd.
There were 20 of these recording rooms, each with its double recording turntable, its control panel, and its own recording engineer. Here's one of them at work, recording the commentary as it is spoken from the arena side.
No, he can't quite make it. It's still Whitfield by about 5 yards.
As the discs were made, they were indexed and sent to the record library until they were wanted. Many thousands of records had passed through the hands of the librarians before the games were over. After making his record, the commentator would check it, and behind soundproof doors were the 14 playback rooms where this could be done. For sending out talks or recorded commentaries, 16 studios had been built, and here is one being prepared for a broadcast. The engineer enters first to make routine tests with central control room.
I'd like to do a mic test, old man. Right. This is Studio 1 here. Front, back, leads 1, 2, and 3. Cable all the way. The wall.
A recorded program assistant is in charge of the studio while the broadcast is going out. She has brought with her from the library the record of the commentary.
Control room.
Control room here.
Oh, you ready for the recording?
Yes, thank you.
Radio Global. I've just arrived. Would you like some level from him first?
Yes, please.
Okay, ready for level.
Thank you.
And then comes the broadcaster, in this case a Brazilian, who, after giving a level test, introduces to his countrymen his recorded running commentary.
Caímos valorosamente para o sétimo.
Thank you.
Não tivemos sortes, amigos do Brasil, na apresentação de ontem da nossa equipe de basquetebol. Essa é a nossa opinião e vocês verão pela gravação que vamos apresentar agora.
And now here is an interview with the Belgian boxing team, going out to Belgium live and not recorded.
Monsieur Gargagnin, est-ce que vous pouvez dire, en attention de nos auditeurs, comment Cavignac a-t-il été mis knock-out il y a quelques instants?
Sur un crochet gauche, n'est-ce pas, par place contrée du droit à la mâchoire, et malheureusement notre Cavignac est tombé et a fait une chute sur la base.
C'est bien ça que vous avez vu.
Exactement, je vous touché vraiment pas de menton, j'ai tombé la tête.
But the nerve center of this great organization was the central control room, into which came lines from every commentating position and every studio, and where telephone lines and radio links to every corner of the earth began and were interconnected. Through these master control positions, 36 different broadcasts could be transmitted at one and the same time. Here were the fascinating line identity records, which from the time a foreign link-up was established by the engineers, kept the lines open by repeated announcements in every language used on the route.
London nach Budapest. Londonból Budapestre közvetítünk.
Transmission from London to Budapest.
And that is a very brief glimpse of the sound broadcasting of the Olympic Games. Now what of television? Inside the stadium and at the Empire Pool, the cameras had been set up. Each position being connected for both vision and sound to a control position outside. Here sat producer and engineers controlling the commentators and cameramen and relaying the selected pictures to the master control room inside the broadcasting center. Here another producer would be in control. Watching two pictures, one from the stadium, the other from the pool, he chose the most exciting for onward transmission to Alexandra Palace and so to the viewer. Television interviews were often transmitted within seconds of the end of a contest. Here is a boxer being led to tell his story in the miniature Empire Pool studio.
I've got here with me now Douglas Dupree of South Africa, who has just fought an extremely hard fight against Ottavio Visler. Oh, Douglas, now tell us how you feel after that fight.
Well, at the present moment, I'm not feeling so good. I'm feeling damn tired.
Tell me, how was the eye? Did you get the eye in an earlier bout?
Yes, I got it fighting with the Australian.
Oh, you got him a crack on the top of the head. Well, Douglas Dupree, thank you very much indeed for coming along. And I'm sure all of us here in Great Britain wish your three finalists from Africa, South Africa, the best of luck this evening. And now we must go back to the pool for the next bout.
And that is how many viewers will remember watching the Olympic Games of 1948. It was hard work for everybody. And for their guests and staff, the BBC's catering department organized a restaurant and a small bar. Here, on the last day of all, our film camera caught famous broadcasters.
Well, of course, the way that he won makes him...
Like Jack Crump and Raymond Glendenning.
...white man in the world, doesn't it? Yes, it does, though Patton trimmed him in the 200 metres, you know. I think Patton...
And Winford Vaughan Thomas and Lloyd James.
Did I hear a commentary? No, all he did was lift his microphone to his lips and smile very sweetly and say, "Soon I shall speak, very soon."
On August the 14th, the games of the 14th Olympiad came to a close. The work of the Wembley Broadcasting and Television Centre was done, and dismantling immediately began. planning and installation had been spread over nearly 2 years. It had been in operation for little longer than 2 weeks. 2 weeks in which this immensely complicated headquarters had hummed with cosmopolitan activity, with comradeship, hospitality, and goodwill.
Now, when I first did this lecture, we believed there was no footage, telerecording of the Olympic Games. And so at the end, I put in the 2 races of the golden girl of the 1948 Olympics, Fanny Blankers-Koen from Holland. She won 4 gold medals, and this is her doing 2 of her races.
From Wembley Stadium. Again recalled for you by Jack Crump, manager of Britain's Olympic athletic team.
Here she is.
The start of the 80 metres hurdles, the first event on Wednesday. Miss Maureen Gardner and Miss Blankers-Koen are the great rivals here. The runners get down to their marks. Set, Maureen Gardner that was. Maureen's away first, but now they're level. Mrs. Blankers-Koen and Maureen Gardner are level. Contrasting styles, as you can see from slow motion. Mrs. Blankers-Koen is perhaps an inch ahead. No one's quite sure. Maureen hopes she's won. She rushes forward in the arms of an official. But Mrs. Blankers-Koen was the winner in world record time. And back at Wembley on Friday, we continued the athletics in atrocious weather. Start of the 200 metres final for women. And Mrs. Blankers-Koen on the inside is gaining rapidly. She catches her fields and streaks away. What a magnificent athlete she is. She wins an easy victory, but behind her there's a terrific struggle for 3rd place and 2nd place now. Miss Williamson catches up, Miss Shirley Strickland, and then the American. And she gains 2nd place for Britain, but Miss Blankers-Koen gets a bouquet and the title.
The end of February, we thought that we had no telerecordings of the Olympic Games of 1948. And then when I gave this lecture to the BBC, their digital team of 160 people that are doing the digital delivery of the Olympics, somebody suggested there was a short piece in a program called We Bring You Live Pictures from 1982. And we'll just look at that.
Behind the Union Jack comes the British contingent, which, in its place of honour as the host at the Games, brings up the very rear of the great athletic procession.
These are the pictures that viewers saw in their homes, preserved for us now by a recording method which in those days was still experimental.
Now there, we've come over very abruptly to outside, because here, before we expected it, is the last torch being brought to Wembley Stadium, an escort of motorcycle police and cars round it, and in the centre, running very slowly and splendidly and escorted by 4 other athletes, the bearer, John Mark, the bearer of the Olympic torch.
In the programme notes of We Bring You Live Pictures, it did actually say there was 400 feet of telerecording, 16mm, of the opening ceremony. But my friend over there, Andrew Martin, we couldn't find it, and we discovered that it was miscatalogued, and we found it last week, and on Saturday I spent 4 hours doing the telecine of it because it's a bit difficult, this film, and I'm now going to show you the only film telerecording that the BBC has now of the opening of the 1948 Olympic Games. I'd like you to take note of the fact that I believe it is the only telerecording ever of super Emertron cameras working, not standard Emertrons. You can see Pagliacci and all that on standard Emertrons, but this is the thing. And given the fact that people were watching them on 10:8 size picture screens, it's not bad.
There you can see the jam of cars and people who have prevented the royal family from coming out that way, and now the royal family have got out of their cars and are coming through the royal tunnel into the stadium, where they're being met by representatives of the Olympic Committee. And I'll now hand you back to Richard Dimbleby, waiting in the stadium to see their Majesties arrive. As we wait now, the top hats of the waiting committee have been removed, and in front of them stand Lord Portal, the President of the Games, and Lord Burleigh, the Chairman of the International Committee. And they wait, standing in the center of the running track, for their Majesties to come through the tunnel that passes underneath where we are and brings them out straight onto the track. And I think that you're going to hear a great roar of welcome as their Majesties appear. Just that breathless moment now before they come. A very good picture of Lord Burleigh there on the right-hand side, making quite sure that his morning coat is hanging just at the right angle and preparing for the moment of reception. I think for a man who's worked so hard, it must be a great moment. And here is His Majesty, and I leave it to you to listen to the crowd when they see that they're here. Met first of all Lord Portal, the President of the Games, of course, and now the anthem is playing. When these presentations are over, the King is going to return to the royal box with the two committees. They will go to their seats, and then begins the march past. All this to the music of Handel, of course, played by the mass bands on the other side of the stadium. The King now turns away and comes back across the track, wearing, as he always does on these occasions, his uniform of Admiral of the Fleet. And here they are, first of all led in the position of honor by the contingent from Greece. Greece, which always has the honor of leading the international parade at the opening of each of the Olympic Games. The contingent of Greece, first a name board and then the Greek flag carried proudly, followed by the Greek officials and after that by the Greek athletes. Men who've come a long way here to London, and some of them have come from parts of Greece where traveling wasn't very easy or very safe for them. And now behind them you see more contingents coming into the arena. Afghanistan come next, the Greeks in grey, the Afghanistan team in their green blazers and their flannels, and carrying the very bright flag of Afghanistan proudly on high. Now the applause rings round the whole stadium as the teams come in. A lovely picture the white flannels make of the Afghanistan team as they march so well in step together. Now it's their turn to come up towards the royal box, and then in the background comes the delegation the contingent from the Argentine. And even as the Greeks were in grey, the Afghanistan contingent in green, so the Argentinians are in blue. And the Argentinians bring not only their flag at the front of their contingent, but they carry their country's flag horizontally between 10 bearers, bringing up almost the rear of their own procession. The Argentinian flag carried facing up to the sky. This Argentine contingent is the biggest, I believe, of all the foreign contingents coming to the Games. You can see what a very considerable procession. If you look back a little way, you'll see the length of it. This is all the Argentine contingent still marching in. Marching in white immediately behind the flag, you see the horsemen who are going to compete in the very intricate mounted contests down at Aldershot and later here in the stadium. The Argentinians, of course, renowned horsemen. They march in a solid little block in their breeches and their boots, and behind them, right back to the entrance to the stadium, into which the next contingent is just coming, those are all the men of the Argentine. They all salute the Argentinian horsemen as they pass. And the American Stars and Stripes just going out of the picture on the right there. That is all the United States contingent, and they're still coming in from the entrance. Enormous contingent, this, at least twice as big as any other that we've seen in the arena this afternoon. American Army officers. American Army officers from the equestrian event, and here are the other competitors going by in large squads. And I'll now hand you back to Richard Dimbleby. Now there, we've come over very abruptly to outside, because here, before we expected it, is the last torch being brought to Wembley Stadium, an escort of motorcycle police and cars round it, and in the centre, running very slowly and splendidly and escorted by 4 other athletes, the bearer, John Mark, the bearer of the Olympic torch. The secret is out, for this is a Cambridge athlete chosen for his magnificent appearance as he brings the last torch to Wembley. You see for yourselves how splendidly, how beautifully he's running. That torch, the last of a series of 2,000, brought across all the countries of Europe, and burning now. You can just see the flame flickering now and then, with the 3 motorcycle policemen and the people capping it as it goes by. Coming to the end of a great, thrilling and romantic journey, as John Mark, a man, by comparison with many other athletes, not well known. Rapid journey from outside to inside and inside to outside. However, I'm glad we did just see the torchbearer, who was very much ahead of his time. Certainly ahead of the time that we were expecting. But now here, behind the Union Jack, comes the British contingent, which, in its place of honour as the host at the Games, brings up the very rear of the great athletic procession. Now we've given a great welcome to all the competitors from overseas. Now comes our own turn to bid welcome and good cheer to our own men and women who are going to represent us in the Games. I would only tell you that their uniforms are dark blue with white trousers, berets on their heads, and the girls behind in blue and white as well, the contingent of Great Britain.
And that's it. Thank you very much.